The key takeaways here are that in base 5020, we only have to interact with the ducts and vents one time at the very beginning of the night, and about 90% of the night is just sitting idle in the office. This was the first step in my ladder to Hopeless Pursuit, and I won't lie, despite its low max mode list ranking, 5020 gave me quite a bit of trouble. Wait, hold on, bro. What the fuck? What is that? And I think the main reason why has to do with the keyboard usage in every UCN-based max mode. And I found that through every single max mode I've done that involves a keyboard, it's always my weak spot. And honestly, this makes sense. I had trained my aim with games like Five Nights at Candy's 3 way before I did 5020. So even though I had done quote-unquote harder challenges than 5020, it was still able to capitalize on my weak spot. Eventually though, I was able to beat it on stream.
Ultra free challenge, what can I say?
But of course, this was only the first step in a very, very long journey. Now, we aren't going to move on to UCN Deluxe quite yet, as that's still a really big jump in skill, and vanilla UCN still has one more challenge that we have yet to complete. We may have beaten 5020, but we did use the death coin to erase Funtime Foxy for most of the night, so the next logical step was to beat 5020 without using the death coin. On paper, the difference between 5020 and 5020 no death coin shouldn't be that crazy. Functionally, you're only adding one more animatronic. However, it's very important to note that in UCN, animatronics are not weighted equally in difficulty. Honestly, you could take all of the duct characters, vent characters, and distraction characters, put them all together, and they still wouldn't be as difficult as just turning Toy Freddy or Funtime Foxy on. Think of it like this, rather than a linear difficulty curve that gradually increases at a steady rate as you add more animatronics, we instead have an exponential curve. Point being, the jump between 5020 and 5020 no death coin is arguably more than 020 and 4520. So what makes 5020 no death coin so much harder than 5020? Well, we're no longer able to erase Funtime Foxy, so now we're forced to remain on his camera in Funtime Cove, which means that we can no longer cam stall any of the plushie animatronics, forcing us to play the game past the first 30 seconds. Overall though, 5020 NDC was quite the jump from normal 5020, and required a lot more action past the first bit of the night. I used a strategy that was a bit more consistent and relied a lot less on luck, but I still ended up with around 30 to 40 Toy Freddy deaths before I ended up beating it, again on stream.
GG, boys! Let's go.
And that's about as far as vanilla UCN takes us, without doing any high AIs or green running. However, once players had beaten 5020 and 5020 no death coin, some took it a step further and wanted to beat UCN the intended way, without using any exploits like cam stalling and office stalling from before. Shooter25 had beaten it this way by death coining Toy Freddy, and True Player had done it with no death coin at all. Though this may have been the intended way to play UCN, it had a glaring issue. It was extremely luck-based. So the UCN community at the time wanted to make UCN more fun and also play it in its intended way, while not having stupidly hard RNG. And with that, debatably the most influential mod in the FNAF community was created. And if you thought the original UCN was chaotic, just wait until you see Ultimate Custom Night Deluxe. Now, I'm sorry, that was a lot of setup and explaining vanilla UCN, but now we can focus on the main portion of this video with UCN Deluxe. UCN Deluxe is essentially a reimagining of UCN, with much more interactive and fair gameplay. Well, not always exactly fair, but pretty close.
I should have checked left defense. But... Dude! Fuck you. Dude, I'm lagging!
So let's go over how UCN Deluxe changes the base game of Ultimate Custom Night. We'll go over how the game has been universally changed first, then we can go into some animatronic specific differences, as the difficulty power balance from Vanilla UCN to Deluxe is pretty different. The most significant change from Vanilla to Deluxe is that now any kind of stalling mechanics have been completely removed. If you remember from Vanilla UCN, animatronics would just wait outside your office until the cameras were pulled up to either spawn or jump scare you. Well, now they simply do not care. And this goes for literally everyone. So anyone that was office stalled before will now just straight up jump scare you, and anyone that could only spawn with the cameras up will now just appear randomly. The night length has also been increased from 4 minutes and 30 seconds to a full 6 minutes, with a perfect 1 minute to 1 in-game hour ratio. To compensate for the increased tool usage and extended night length, the power has also been changed so that 1% of Deluxe power is worth significantly more than 1% of Vanilla power, by a factor of roughly 1.66 times. The duct and vent systems have now also been changed so that you have to check them frequently throughout the night. In Vanilla UCN, when you placed an audio lure or set a vent snare, it would remain in that position until you placed it somewhere else. However, in UCN Deluxe, the audio lure and vent snare will now slowly fade over time, meaning you'll now have to go back and check both the duct system and vent system throughout the entire night. Now let's talk about some character changes. A big change in UCN Deluxe is that every character's intervals have been completely randomized. You see, in Vanilla UCN, certain characters would always appear or jump scare on given intervals. For pretty much every character in the game, their technical info would always follow the formula of on X second intervals, X character has a chance to appear and jump scare you when the cameras are up. This is why whenever you watch a skilled Vanilla UCN player, you'll hear them literally destroy the enter key for L chip on every 10-second mark, since he always appears on 10-second intervals. So now, every character is pretty much impossible to predict with the timer. There are also some characters that have been notably reworked. To make this easier, we'll go through each type of character in groups, and generally there's 5. There's office characters that you have to deal with when you're sitting in the office, camera characters, which are characters that you directly interact with in the camera system, door characters, which spawn at the doors and require you to block them off, there's progression characters, which require some sort of tool to be used to keep them at bay, and distraction characters. Before we get into the changes for each character, I do want to remind you guys that it would mean the world to me if you subscribed. It helps more than literally anything for the channel. But of course, only do so if you're enjoying the video so far. At the end of the normal Deluxe NDC section, I'll briefly go over a ranking in tier list form for all of the characters, because some characters went from stupid easy in normal UCN to like top 1 in Deluxe. Out of the 5 groups, we'll start with our office characters. And honestly, a lot of the changes to office characters are more quality of life changes and reworks than direct buffs. Toy Bonnie, Toy Chica, and Withered Bonnie have all been significantly nerfed from their base game counterparts. Because we're going to be in the cameras for much longer in UCN Deluxe, these 3 mask characters went from being mega free in normal UCN to now throwing off the entire cycle of the game whenever they spawn. Thankfully, they don't kill nearly as fast, usually giving you enough time to finish whatever you're doing in the cameras before dealing with them. One of the most hated characters in Ultimate Custom Night, Night Marionette, has been slightly nerfed in Deluxe. In Vanilla, Night Marionette would slowly materialize on top of your cursor if you kept it in one of his positions for too long. If he fully materialized, he would jump scare you. In Deluxe, he's pretty similar, though he now appears slower and disappears much faster. For our last notable character change, I have to talk about Rockstar Chica in one of the best quality of life changes in history. Alright, so normally in Vanilla UCN, in order to move the wet floor sign, you have to do a quote-unquote double click. Unfortunately, the double clicking that the game wants is far different from a double click that you're probably used to. In order for a double click to properly register in a click team game, you have to click on the exact same pixel twice in a row. This doesn't sound too hard, you just don't move your mouse. But when both of the wet floor sign spawns are on top of Night Marionette, and you have to quickly flick your mouse in, double click, then get out, it's pretty difficult. And thank the Lord, because the wet floor sign in UCN Deluxe only requires one click to move. Everyone else in the office is either either unchanged from vanilla or not really different enough to care about. Golden Freddy did get a cool reskin though. Now let's talk about our camera characters. Bonnie and Foxy have been changed so that you now actually have to check Pirate's Cove pretty frequently. In vanilla UCN, you could abuse a technique called zero frame flipping in order to switch whoever was on the desk without committing to opening the cameras. However, Bonnie and Foxy are now guaranteed to switch after a given amount of time, so you can't stall out with Bonnie on the desk like you could in vanilla. All of the plushie animatronics have had their prices
I didn't know I had that much.
increased from 20 Faz coins to 40. And now you have a full hour to buy the plushie rather than just 20 seconds. Moving over to the vents and the ducts, every animatronic within the duct and vent system has now been given a unique purpose, whereas in vanilla, you check both of these once at the beginning of the night, then never again. In the vent system, Mangle and Withered Chica will bonk on the vent snares, but Springtrap, Molten Freddy, and Ennard can go right through them and will have to be dealt with by closing the front vent door in the office. It is worth noting that while Mangle can phase directly through the office vent door, even when it's closed, Withered Chica cannot. So if you're ever sandwiched and forced to let one of them through, let Withered Chica through and close the front vent until you hear her bonk. Ennard and Springtrap retain their mechanics from the vanilla game. Just close the front vent when you hear Ennard scurry and when you see Springtrap appear visually. Molten Freddy, however, does not make an audio cue or a visual cue, and you'll have to track him on the cameras in order to know when to close the front vent door. The duct system is probably the most changed part of Deluxe in comparison to vanilla UCN. In the ducts, you'll have to fend off the mediocre melodies using the audio lure and changing which duct is open or closed. In vanilla UCN, the ducts were generally dealt with by placing a lure which would permanently stun Happy Frog, Mr. Hippo, and Pig Patch, then using the heater to push back Ned Bear and Orville. However, the heater is now completely ineffective. Instead, you'll have to use the ducts as a sort of closed door that Ned Bear and Orville will now bonk on. Whenever either of them gets close to a closed duct, Whenever either of them gets close to a closed duct, they'll bonk and you'll be awarded a Faz coin like any other animatronic hitting a door. Pigpatch and Mr. Hippo have also been changed to now ignore the audio lure if it's placed on the same side for more than 2 cycles. So you will have to change the lure and open side pretty frequently. Fortunately, Happy Frog will still fall for the lure regardless of how long she's been in the same spot. This can all seem a bit complex, so we'll get more into how to deal with the duck specifically in the strategy section. Funtime Foxy has the same mechanic that he does in vanilla. Simply select the camera when the hour switches. However, you'll be dealing with him more here than in vanilla UCN. In the vanilla game, the next showtime can be set from a range of 1 to 3 hours away. Now, in Deluxe, it is instead 1 to 2 hours away. To balance this out, compared to vanilla where you had to be on his camera and watching the cameras when the hour changed, in Deluxe, you now simply have to have his camera selected. So you can be in the office and it'll still count as watching him, which is a very nice quality of life change. All of the other camera characters work nearly identically to how they are in vanilla, with some having slightly longer kill timers to balance out the increased cycle time in Deluxe. Now let's move on to our door characters. Door characters in UCN Deluxe will become a recurring theme for my weakness throughout this video, as now we're forced to deal with them throughout the entire night. While most characters are unchanged, just spawning whenever they want rather than waiting for the cameras to be up, Afton has been significantly buffed. In vanilla UCN, Afton can only appear once per night, and compared to all the other kill timers for door characters, his is by far the fastest and most reaction based. There's a lot more technical details that make Afton really hard for this challenge, but they aren't really that obvious until Hopeless Pursuit. Instead of appearing once a night like in vanilla, he will now appear multiple times throughout the night. He has the same attack timer as he does in vanilla, so he adds a lot of keyboard chaos with the quick reactions you need to deal with him. While there aren't very many progression characters, in fact there's only 4 of them, they've all received pretty significant changes. You see, in vanilla UCN, the 5 tools in your office faced a similar problem to the animatronics. They are wildly unbalanced. The usual tool strategy for vanilla is known as the GMB cycle. Without getting too technical, the GMB cycle is basically having the global music box on for half the night, and then to break it up and recover power and temperature using the power generator and fan. Not only was this strategy very easy to learn, the GMB took care of every single progression animatronic by itself. This means that the heater, power AC, and especially silent ventilation weren't required at all in the vanilla game. So in UCN Deluxe, a bit of tool rebalancing was done to force some usage of the other tools. We see this first and most prominently with Lefty. In vanilla, Lefty would get aggravated from temperature and noise and was calmed down with the global music box. He still gets angry from heat and noise in Deluxe, but now we have to use the silent ventilation to cool him down instead of the GMB. For the puppet, both winding the box manually and using the GMB have been changed to be much faster than in vanilla UCN, making him a lot easier overall. as now you only have to give him 2 to 3 seconds of winding either way. Music Man is functionally the same as he was in vanilla, but now you'll be forced to actually pay attention to his progress instead of just relying on the GMB cycle. The power AC and heater have been slightly reworked through Nightmare Chica and Lefty. In vanilla, Nightmare Chica was repelled using the power AC, but in UCN Deluxe, the power AC would be kind of overpowered. It cools the office ridiculously fast, barely makes any noise, and like any other tool, only takes 1 bar of usage. So now, Nightmare Chica is repelled with the heater instead, forcing you to heat up the office. Power AC usage is also discouraged, as it now aggravates Lefty, so generally, you only want to cool down the office through the power generator and fan. Speaking of temperature, Jacko Chica has been straight up buffed, now killing significantly faster if the office is ever over 90 degrees. Lastly are the distraction characters. These distraction characters are all mostly identical to their vanilla counterparts minus the universal random interval changes. Though we do have another quality of life change in the balloon from Trash and the Gang, who is now much more transparent so you can actually see the cameras unlike the vanilla game. That's it for the main roster, but if you're familiar with 5020, you know there's actually 56 characters in the night, not just 50, as Zor will add 6 secret characters. Just like vanilla, Zor will be guaranteed to appear in 5020. However, in Deluxe, he will always spawn at 11 seconds, so there's no RNG with when the characters will spawn. The biggest buff the Zor characters received was how they spawn. In vanilla, besides Bonnet, the Zor characters would only spawn once, and once they were dealt with, they were gone for the rest of the night. In Deluxe, however, the 5 secret characters that only spawn once have now received the Afton treatment, and will now continuously respawn throughout the night. With all of these changes and rebalancing, not only is Deluxe much more interactive in its camera and tool usage, it is also way harder. If we go back to our ladder chart here, you could say the jump from 5020 to NDC is about 3 times. So NDC is 3 times harder than normal 5020. Now, jumping from vanilla NDC to deluxe NDC, that's easily a 3 to 5 times difficulty multiplier. And deluxe NDC to hopeless pursuit, oh man, we'll get to that later. So with all of these character changes, what does the strategy for Deluxe even look like? With 56 total characters active, you may think that dealing with all of them would be really confusing, but don't worry, 90% of the time, characters can be dealt with using a consistent cycle pioneered by none other than Brayden. 5020 and 5020 NDC share the same cycle, but depending on who you deathcoin, the cycle does change a little bit. The deathcoin roster is the same as vanilla, as you can only deathcoin 6 of the most key characters in the night, those being Bonnie and Foxy, Puppet and Chica, Rockstar Bonnie, Toy Freddy, Funtime Foxy, and Lefty. Unlike vanilla, all deathcoin routes here are viable, so choose whoever gives you the most trouble, but I personally recommend you deathcoin Puppet and Chica, since Puppet adds about 2 seconds to each cam cycle, and Chica is very inconsistent and hard to hear when starting out. When entering the night, you want to first hold down the spacebar, just like vanilla, but do not turn on the power generator, as this will make Music Man very angry very quickly, and we're going to have to keep him as calm as possible for the camera cycles when cooling down the office. Similar to vanilla strategies, we're going to enter the ducks and place a lure in the middle left. Now we want to begin coin farming. Coin farming in Deluxe has been tweaked a bit to allow the player to farm more coins. Helpy, BB, and JJ will all spawn on every single flip, every time, guaranteed. For coin farming in Deluxe, it is highly recommended that you learn maskless coin farming. Maskless was originally implemented in runs of 50-40 mode in vanilla UCN, and takes advantage of Golden Freddy's lenient kill timer in the office. Instead of putting on the mask every time you pull up the cameras, instead just pull up the cameras again before Golden Freddy even has a chance to kill you. You can take this a step further by moving your mouse and clicking things in the camera monitor while you coin farm. While this technically isn't required, we're going to need a lot more coins than vanilla UCN, and especially later on for Hopeless Pursuit, you're going to have to get really good at coin farming. The more coins you get, the better. At the 14-second mark, you're going to want anywhere from 20 to 30 coins. If Foxy spawned on the desk when the night started, make sure you also work a Foxy check in there while you're coin farming. Now, once Zor has shown up, stop coin farming and enter the cameras. Head straight for the music box, wind the box fully, then place a lure in the same spot as before. Place a snare in the left spot, deal with Toy Freddy, select Funtime Foxy's camera, then drop the cameras. If you have to coin farm more at this point, you can, but generally you should have enough. Now we can start the general cycle for the entire night. This cycle is generally broken up into two parts, the camera cycle and the office cycle. Camera cycles are when you're actively navigating through the camera monitor and dealing with threats all throughout the building. While you're in the cameras, a few characters will begin to spawn in the office. So once you drop the cameras, you then have to deal with all the threats in the office cycle. Now, here is the general strategy for the camera cycle. Right before you open the cameras, you want to see if Foxy or Bonnie is on the desk. Then, depending on who is on the desk, either check Foxy's camera if it was Foxy, or go straight to Cam 4 if it was Bonnie. Now, wind the music box and listen very carefully. In Vanilla, Chica was dealt with through the global music box and wasn't a threat whatsoever, but in Deluxe, we actually have to play her mechanic. Chica's mechanic is simple on paper, but in my opinion is the hardest mechanic to deal with in Deluxe. If Chica is happy, you'll hear pots and pans banging in the background, and if she's not, you won't hear anything. If Chica is unhappy, you have to change the music to keep her from jump scaring you, but if you change the music while she's happy, she also just jump scares you. This would be fine, however, there are two key problems with Deluxe that make this mechanic so difficult. The first of which is the actual audio file that the game uses for the pots and pans sound effect. Chica's pots and pans sound is a continuously looping 11-second audio clip. However, the last 1.5 seconds of this file are silent in order to have the clip repeat.
¿Por qué aceptar que la página web esté siempre fuera de servicio? ¿Por qué hacer esperar a los clientes hasta que la página por fin se carga? ¿Y por qué preocuparse constantemente por la seguridad en lugar de centrarse en el negocio?
Con el hosting premium de Ionos, obtienes.
So sometimes you'll be listening for Chica during this 1 to 2 seconds of silence, and you'll think, oh wow, that's dead silence, I should probably change the music. And then you die because she was still happy. The other problem is that so much is happening in Deluxe with the amount of doors you're shutting and cameras that you're selecting that it's really hard to hear the subtle pots and pans over all of it. Like here, let's do a quick test. Can you hear the pots and pans? As you're winding the box, quickly glance at the temperature for the building. Both Jacko, Chica, and Lefty will get angry if the temperature gets too high, and generally, we never want the temp going over 80 degrees. So if the temperature while you're winding the box is 65 degrees or higher, turn on the power generator and fan. In UCN, every item that you turn on will add 1 usage to your power. So if I have 2 doors closed and the fan on, I'd be using 3 usage. Now, turning the power generator on will subtract 1 usage from that counter. Power isn't too hard in NDC Deluxe, but generally speaking, we only want to have 1 usage on at all times. So if we had the power gen and fan on while we're in the cameras, functionally, we'd still only have 1 usage, because the power generator cancels out the fan's usage. Once you finish winding the box and change the music if need be, make your way to the duct system. The ducts are generally one of the most confusing systems for newer players, but I think I have a general explanation that might help. So think of the audio lure as a temporary wall rather than an actual lure, and the closed duct as a permanent wall. Now, whichever duct has Orville or Nedbear close to it, you need to change to closed. Then you always want to have the lure on the same side as the open duct to act as a temporary wall. Remember that Mr. Hippo and Pigpatch will get tired of the audio lure if it's placed in the same spot for more than 2 cycles. So if you can, always change the lure and ducts around. It is a bit easier to differentiate who is who, as Deluxe adds new cartoon icons for the ducts and the vents. Once you've dealt with the duct system, make your way to the vents, which are a lot simpler to deal with than the ducts. You're only really looking for 2 animatronics, Withered Chica and Mangle. Remember that Withered Chica and Mangle are dealt with through the vent snares, and everyone else is dealt with through the door. So you want to recognize where Chica and Mangle are and place the vent snare on whichever side you think they're closest to. Even if you're placing the snare on the same side, you still want to click it again, as remember, the lure and the snare will both fade over time. Though because there are 2 animatronics that are dealt with through the snare, sometimes you can get the quote-unquote Deluxe has no RNG situation, where Mangle and Chica basically pincer you by lining up to hit 2 different vent snares at the same time. And there's 2 ways you can deal with this. In both cases, you always want to prioritize Mangle, as she will go straight through the vent office door even if it's closed. Now, once you've closed off Mangle's snare, you can either leave and come back to the vent system before this cam cycle is over, or you can just keep the front vent closed until you think Withered Chica has bonked on it. Just beware, as this will use a lot of power. Once you've dealt with Mangle and Chica, be sure to see if Molten Freddy is about to hit the vent, and close him if he is. Then we can move on to the camera system. The cycle in the cameras is actually really well designed, and to understand why, we have to look at some some of the most important characters in UCN Deluxe. First is Rockstar Bonnie. Rockstar Bonnie is known for being one of the hardest characters in the base game of UCN. He is so difficult, in fact, the strategy for dealing with him in vanilla UCN is to never hit his intervals so he never spawns, and if he does, you just reset the run because it is not winnable. But here, he's always going to spawn. His mechanic from the base game remains unchanged though. Once he spawns in, you have to find his guitar on the cameras, then click it to grab it. The guitar will always spawn in either the left hall, right hall, Toy Freddy's camera, or Funtime Foxy's camera, so we can add those to our list of cameras to check. It will always be in the bottom left corner of each of these cameras. So as you're mousing through the cameras, keep an eye on the bottom left corner of the screen for the guitar. And this works out perfectly for us, as every threat that we have to deal with in the cameras is in these 4 cameras. So once you're done with the vents, first check the right hall, then the left hall. If the time just changed to 1, 3, or 5 AM, you can see which plushie animatronic is in the right hall. Then move into the left hall to check for Freddy. You can also track Freddy using intervals, and this is honestly the much better strategy, but we'll get more into that later. Now, briefly glance at Lefty's camera to see what stage he's in. If he's standing up, keep note of his position, but don't turn on the silent ventilation quite yet. Remember, we always want to maintain that 1 usage max throughout the entire night. Having silent ventilation on while you're in the cameras would burn through your power insanely fast. Now, move up to Toy Freddy's camera and play his game. Mr. Hugs is guaranteed to move every cycle, so he'll never be in the same spot that you already blocked off in the last cycle. Meaning that if you're on a camera and Mr. Hugs isn't there and the other camera is blocked off, you know for sure that Mr. Hugs is currently in the only other open camera. These minor optimizations for speed are crucial to get down for NDC Deluxe and especially HP, so anytime that we can gain the slightest bit of time anywhere, we should take it. Now, if you're on a plushie cycle, you can go to Cam 7 and buy the plushie. If not, hit Funtime Foxy's camera and wait for about a second. Remember that Plush Trap will reappear throughout the night. So if he's there, wait until he leaves his chair, then reset the ventilation. So now here's what a full cam cycle looks like in full speed. Now we're ready for the office cycle, which is significantly shorter and easier in my opinion. As soon as you drop the cameras, remember what stage Lefty was in earlier. If he was still sitting down, just turn off the power gen and fan with 1 in space. But if he was standing up in cam 3, right as you drop the cameras, press 2 and then space to both turn on the silent ventilation and turn off the fan. Since we're no longer in the cameras, using silent ventilation here will only cost us 1 usage while soothing Lefty and working to keep the office a bit cooler. Now, once we're in the office, throw on the mask immediately for any mask characters that may have spawned and Golden Freddy. Then click Helpy and move the wet floor sign to despawn Rockstar Chica. While you're here, make sure to use the flashlight to despawn the Freddles. You can flash while you're in the cameras, but doing it during the office cycle will use less power. Just make sure that you're not flashing Nightmare Balloon Boy if he's sitting down, which is a lot easier said than done. Once you've dealt with any other office threats, check who's on the desk, then you can repeat the cam cycle. Do not wait around in the office once you're done with everything. Just start another camera cycle and keep going immediately. Now, as simple as this cycle may sound, we do have to deal with some characters who will break our camera cycle. Those being Withered Bonnie, Toy Chica, and Bonnet. For the 3 mask characters, if you're not quick enough or they spawn at the start of a cycle, you will have to pull down your monitor and deal with them in the office or they will jump scare you.
5 points.
Get as far as you can into a cycle just before you die, then put on the mask. A general guideline here is that if you're finished dealing with the vent system, you can always finish the cycle fully before they jump scare you, but if you're not there yet, you're gonna have to break your cycle and deal with them. Once they leave, deal with everything that spawns in the office on that flip, then flip back up, finish the camera cycle, and continue with the normal office cycle. This is by far the hardest part in NDC Deluxe, as you'll have to adapt on the fly to a masked character breaking the cycle. And if they decide to line up one after another, it can get really crazy trying to keep your cycle. Here's the best example of this where I have honestly no idea how I survived this.